Welcome. This is another edition of our season 2 of Present Her. And today it's an absolute privilege, I think, to be able to chat with someone that I've admired for a very long time. Ever since I first met her, that admiration's only gone up. We're talking about former England international, a chemistry major, a lover of the arts, someone who's a multi-World Cup winner, great administrator, great advocate for diversity and for bringing young people from less privileged backgrounds into the game. Surrey, England, and now a much sought after broadcaster, both on radio and television, Ebony Rainford-Brent. Welcome, Ed. It's an absolute delight.
Thanks, Prakash. You made me blush there with a big build-up, but you know it's always great talking to you. You've got your own real call as well, so honoured to talk to you as always.
So, Ebs, what we want to try and do is really just chat about, how the whole transition has happened. Where was this little girl growing up in a part of South London? What were her dreams as someone who was a tiny 5-7-year-old? The trials and tribulations that you went through, and we know that you did have some very poignant moments in your life, which may have even defined what happened with you. So let's begin at the beginning and tell us about your early childhood, your growing up years, your family, and how you sort of came to the point where, from playing games that you've talked about, like football, basketball, and whatever, which was common in the neighborhood, how did cricket finally find you?
Yeah, so where do I start really? So I grew up,
At
the very beginning. I grew up in an area called sort of Herne Hill, Brixton. Loughborough Junction is the kind of little, any Londoners who might know the area, but it was very diverse community. So a lot of West Indians have sort of communities had settled there who'd come from the Windrush. So my mum's a Jamaican lady who'd come over maybe the age of 15 and set root, and I loved sort of where I grew up. It was a very vibrant community, and the one thing I would say is, the sports that are on offer it was pretty much football. Like, everyone was obsessed with football. So I had 3 older brothers, which I think helped make me sporty because I was competitive. I wanted to beat them. And, I was just obsessed with football, and, the early years were great. My very early memories were brilliant. And then, I've spoken about a few times, I lost my brother when I was about 5 unfortunately, to knife crime, which was a pretty tough thing for our family. And so what that did for me, I guess, is sport became my release. I struggled to deal with a lot of the emotions as a young kid. So sport was my thing, and I just was obsessed with playing football, like, day in, day out. I'd stay at what you call after school or play centres and just play non-stop, just, I guess, trying to run all of that out. And it was a bit of luck, really, that changed my life. It was a guy called Tony Moody who was going into state schools in the inner cities who weren't playing cricket, and suggested I should try. Now, I have to be honest, at the age of around sort of 9 or so, I was like, cricket, what's that? It's a bit weird. Like, I'd never seen cricket. The only cricket I'd seen was on TV occasionally, where there were like old white guys in these white clothing drinking tea, and I was just like, what is that? Like, is that a game, or are they just sort of having fun and chilling out, drinking cake and eating cake? Luckily, my teacher sort of persuaded me, give it a go. And the one moment I hit a ball, I remember it was just with a little plastic ball, I was hooked. That was a sort of turning point for me of just, wow, what is this sport? So I played a lot of community stuff. It was me and about 50 boys going down to a local area. And then I finally, through a program, got talent scouted. And that was it. That luck and that experience I had. And then, like I said, getting spotted by a lady called Johnny at Wasdrack, who got me into the structures, changed my life, really. Because it introduced me to something that I had no other experience of. When I looked through my later schooling years and my university, and I didn't cross cricket or know people who played. So that one opportunity changed my life.
Yeah, people talk about sort of love at first sight in personal relationships, in relationships with places, with other aspects of life. would it be fair to say that for a 9-year-old girl, just that sort of impact of bat on ball or the fun that you had was exactly that, love at first sight?
It was, I can describe and feel and hear everything of that moment I hit the ball. So it's, we're in a little caged area, so obviously in the city, it was like a little sort of cage. And I can still see the moment, like I can see it in front of my face where I hit it. It was a blue bat, orange ball, and hearing the sound come off the bat. And it's really weird because I don't think there's many things in my life that I have that rooted sensation. So I knew that was it. That became an obsession. And so yeah, love at first sight. If that exists, that was definitely it.
Well, that's a great start to the story, and let's carry on from there. You went from there to Surrey in terms of sort of joining the club in the what is it, the juniors, I presume, and then on to junior England and so on fairly rapidly. But it's also true that not only are you the first black woman to play for England and represent England, but at the time that you went through these early phases of sort of junior cricket and so on, there couldn't have been too many colored girls with you. How was that experience? Because you've also said in stuff that I've read and heard that in many ways cricket was still seen as a bit of an elitist game. It was meant for sort of people maybe in private schools or whatever. And so to be a trailblazer, which you've been, and we'll talk about that as we go along, how hard was it on a young girl, if at all it was, or were you just oblivious to everything and the joy of cricket just carried you through? What was it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I've spoken quite a lot recently how cricket's always felt like a different world to me, to my normal life or my London life. London, like I said, first of all, it's very diverse. It's very multicultural, very understanding of difference and integrated. And I think as soon as I walked into the cricket bubble, you could see the lack of awareness and cultural awareness, and that sort of leaked through comments, which I've spoken quite recently about just how difficult it was at times of comments about food, hair, your backside, just keep the comments just kept coming. Some really nasty, some just maybe not used to being part of or seeing difference. But I found it quite hard. I found it quite isolating at times. One thing I would say, in some ways I was lucky, myself and Isha Gua, so maybe while we'll talk later about some of the work that I've done, is the community I grew up with was full of lots of different kids from different ethnicities playing, who were very talented and very good and also loved the game as much as I did. But it was like they were left behind for this different world, which was very elitist, had different values, different ways of expressing itself. So I think that's why I do so much now, because I know people love the game. I've traveled around the world and know it's nothing to do with skin color or background, whether you love the game or not. And so those kind of early pains, I suppose, and feeling isolated, maybe drive me to do some of the stuff that I do now.
No, and we are going to talk about that because that's an important part. I just have one other aspect. I'm just going to probe a little bit here, Ebbs. In terms of you've said that some of the comments and some of the sort of critique may have been innocent or just not being exposed. But you've also talked about when you talked about the whole Black Lives Matter piece, and we'll talk about that later on as well. You've talked about almost a drip system where it was maybe a little bit, but it was there all the time. It was a kind of omnipresent. Do you think it was just a reflection of the times? Or was it that, because I'm just trying to figure that in a setup like England cricket, where there is obviously a lot of understanding, education, knowledge, all of that exists, was this seen and tolerated? And I don't want to get controversial about this, but was it seen and tolerated, or was it that it was okay, this is part of the game, you just got to take it on the chin, move on, and just show how good you are? Maybe your yardstick.
Yeah, I think the most dangerous thing that I think happens, and it maybe happens in a lot of sports teams anyway, is it gets labelled as banter. So a comment could be made around your race, which is completely inappropriate. Others would hear it, and if you were to challenge it, it's an easy get out to say, oh, it's just banter. And I think that banter label I've seen many times push against sexist comments, racist comments, inappropriate comments, full stop. And the sports world just has this thing sometimes, well, definitely say the worlds that I've been in, where that is acceptable. And even if people see it and know in that moment that's the wrong thing to say, it's an easy defense to say, oh, it's your problem the way you're responding to it. I was only joking. And so the problem is, if you're the only one in an environment, there's no others standing up for you. So then that's where you kind of just take it on the drip feed, you laugh it off. Your confidence and self-esteem wears away a little bit because you're not challenging, which is something that I regret about myself. I mean, I'm not sure if it would have worked, but I do sometimes think so. I wish if I had that energy to have, gone back and told some people where to go, because I didn't. But you're also trying to get selected. You're also trying to stay part of the team. So it's a really difficult dynamic. But that's what I say that I see a lot of that still exists now, and it's an easy way to get out of saying a really bad comment. It was banter. I'm just joking. Get over it. Why are you over? And that's a problem that I think needs to be really dug into in changing rooms and environments within our game.
Yeah, and it's not just sport. I mean, it's life in general, isn't it? Everywhere, whether it's corporate boardrooms or it's, business or society or life in general. We'll digress just for a minute and come back to your journey, and we'll revisit some of the work that you're doing, which is so meaningful. But as you sort of graduated to playing for England juniors and so on, from a pure sporting perspective, the injuries aspect came to you fairly early in life as well. And that was almost a body blow, quite literally, which threatened to cut short not just a cricketing life, but your personal life. And I know in our conversations, you've talked a lot about how that whole sort of challenge was taken up, how your family helped you. But just walk us through it, Ebony, because I think it's very important for younger people, especially who may be listening, how you overcome adversity. And you're a great example of how to do that. So please, if you would.
Yeah, injuries are, well, they can be a wipeout for you. I suppose I'd start with, so my back was my major issue. I think when I was about 16, because I was a fast bowler and actually started my England career as a fast bowler, which didn't finish because of my back. But I remember sort of having a few issues, sort of cramping up and seizing up, and I spoke to a physio who didn't take it seriously, said, oh, your age, I'm sure you're fine, you're good. So I just kind of kept battling along for a few years with this sort of injury. I maybe had a bit of a mixed action as well, which those days they weren't so all about the bio sort of technicalities and angles and stuff. So I was battling along. I remember being sort of around 19, so I just started university, and I got a call to join the full England side just for some training sessions. Went down thinking, this is like my moment to shine. I'm going to run in and charge in as fast as I can. I remember bowling a few balls and just feeling a little bit, my back was not quite great. Charged in again a few more, and something was off. So I tried to find a way to excuse myself, got him a little Ford Fiesta and came back home. And as I bent down to pick up the remote, it was just like the worst pain ever. I just sort of collapsed. But from that moment, I never actually walked properly again for another year and some. I didn't realize I had, prolapsed discs, pars defects. I had all these different problems that later got diagnosed, and the pain was so crippling, nerve pain going down my leg, all that sort of stuff. I couldn't sit up. I had to leave university, which was pretty difficult. I was told, I remember when the doctor looked at the scan and I was with my mum, she said that most of you will never play sport again, there's too much damage, and started talking about potential for paralysis, and if you get these, and I just remember being like, what is going on? This is horrific. And I kind of just went into a dark place, really. I was sort of lying in bed in dark rooms, not doing very little for about a year, because we'd seen doctors, seen chiropractor. There wasn't a huge amount of funding available to talk about the operation. It was all too far away. So I just kind of went into mentally a dark place. I felt like I'd lost everything, no income, no university, no sport. But the one thing I would say, and this is why it's so good to have good people around you, my brother, Dominic, he's often my go-to, but also quite a harsh talker. I remember he sparked something mentally inside me, which was, he said, he had a go at me and F words came out, I have to be honest. And he sort of said, listen, you're choosing to accept the doctor's reality and belief about what's possible for you. And I was like, yeah, but look at what it says, look at all the detail. This is saying that. And he said, but you're choosing that. Like, you can choose to fight that diagnosis. You can choose to find ways around it. And at the same time, my mum was giving me all these motivational DVDs, which is very sweet of her. She was just trying to get me up. And I remember listening to these Tony Robbins CDs while my brother was kind of telling me this. And I would say this process that next happened is mostly the biggest thing that's happened in terms of developing mental steel. Over the period of 3 years, I started listening to these tapes. I wrote my goals up on the wall, and one of them was to play in the World Cup. So bearing in mind, I hadn't played for the full England team yet, and my dream was to come back and be on that plane for the 2009 World Cup. And it took a year to get back to walking properly, a year to get back to sort of running properly. And during that year, I started getting support. A lady called Barbara Downey's got some funding, and then another year where I then made it and sort of progressed. And so, you know, the mental shift I went through in that phase, which is starting to learn what is possible, realizing that you need people around you who are going to challenge thought process and what's possible for you and what you're capable of. And also having a dream. I think that dream to play, and also I wanted to come back and finish chemistry and get a master's in it, which I did. Those dreams written up and looking at them every day, I still write down my goals now, are one of the most empowering things I've ever done. So I just sort of say to anyone, one, your mind is capable of so much. I believe in healing. One thing I would say as well is I didn't go down the traditional Western route. It didn't work for me, but I did a lot of Eastern medicine and chiropractic care and stuff like that as well. And that was the game changer. So always try and look for opportunities, but also that mental grit about belief and what you want to achieve. It really makes a difference. It completely changed my life.
Absolutely. Very, very, it's moving. Every time I hear this, it's moving. But at the same time, Ebony, as you lay there and you were getting this sort of almost two different kinds, right? There's the mother's love, and there is probably a more practical sibling who's going to push you to say, listen, you can't accept this. Yet, the decision's got to be made within Ebony. No one else is going to make it. And it's going to happen sort of between the years, right? It's the mind that's going to have to control this. Were there moments, even as you began that journey to return to England colours, or the early part of the hard work in rehab? Because many a times you see the end result. You see, okay, Ebony injured, trouble, 2 years, 3 years, whatever. She's back in England colours. Okay, she did well. She fought through it. But talk to us just a little bit about the self-doubt that can creep in, the efforts that you make, and when you don't get that immediate result, right? Because I think that's where it all boils down to, those little wins every day.
I think the number one thing is that self-doubt is there every day, and it's almost like you have to be able to hold the long vision at the same time of take little wins. So, you know, I'm talking my little win. First of all, I couldn't walk. When I started seeing the chiropractor, he would adjust me, and I maybe had about half an hour of walking or an hour walking that day. That was such a major milestone, and that feels like miles away from being able to perform on an international stage. So one is like just enjoying the little process of the little wins. There were many times I thought I was being an idiot. I tell you when I thought I was being an idiot is every time I had a back spasm, because, you know, I still have back problems now, years later. It's not like this is something that has disappeared. And every time you have a back spasm, you will set back. But what I noticed is that I might recover in 3 days instead of 2 weeks, or, you know, what it is, it was getting better. So obviously taking enjoyment out of the little wins. The biggest thing I've learned, and it's a process I've learned about, is called the Cycle of Renewal, is it pretty much says we're inevitably going to be thrown some adversity, but the quality of questions we ask ourselves is the difference in how we and how quickly we come back. So when I look at my early days of that year of depression and lying in bed, the quality of questions were, why did this happen to me? You know, I thought the world was better than this. You know, all those questions had no real ending that was going to do anything positive. Whereas the flip side now is a process of, okay, what could I do today that could move me forward? What could I do? Who could I speak to that might inspire me? What advice? And all those sort of forward-looking questions when you're in a healthy place can help you start to make some really positive change. So I think I had to shift my mindset from looking at the negatives to just trying to find any little bit of inspiration that was possible and moving forward. And I think that's the cycle with depression, is it's a really bad mental state that you go round and round in. Whereas this way round, I learned how to go through that cycle and really ask better questions, which move me forward. So I'd say that the self-doubt creeped in when I first played when I got back to finally made my England debut, my back went again and I was out for nearly a year. So it wasn't that it was an easy ride. I then had to build back up towards the World Cup, and I went off to Australia in the winter, and it was a tough time. But I think that little bit of belief and that finding your inner steel, which no one can give you but yourself, unfortunately. No one can teach you that little bit of grit. I think we all have it. Sometimes we just have to have it exposed through adversity. So yeah, I would say those constant doubts are there, and I think anything I do, I doubt. But it's also learning how to sit alongside the fear. So every time I ran up to bowl, there would be a fear that I'm going to have a spasm and be back in hospital. But then I had to say, look, if I've done the groundwork, I have to just trust and go alongside this fear, and that's the only way you can get through it.
And do you think that the fact that your career in actually representing England for the period that you did could have been a much longer playing career if you didn't have the severity of the injuries, which, even though you overcame them, somewhere probably impeded your progress and your ability to consistently deliver? Would that be something that would be fair to say?
Yeah, I think for a lot of reasons. I think I would have mostly started a bit earlier. I think when 19 and I was called up to that training environment before my back went, I might have got in a few years earlier. I think my mind would have been a bit freer. I think I spent most of my career just with that nervousness. If I play this shot, if I do this, is this going to happen? I was playing along someone like Catherine Brunt, who's still in the team, Danny Wyatt, Tammy Beaumont, and I look and they're still going strong. Similar age to Catherine Brunt. I think, how many caps could I have had? How many runs potentially? Yeah, I think that injury really did. But the one thing I would say that I'm mostly more proud of is actually developing that mindset, like what it taught me as a person, what it took to go through that, and the battles, and also, sometimes critics and people who don't believe in you too. To have had some sort of career, wasn't huge, but enough of a career, and to have faced those battles, I think in some ways it's more meaningful because it didn't come easy. It was something that, you had to really fight for.
First of all, there aren't that many people who've played any sport and won 2 World Cups. I don't think there's too many people who've had the kind of year that 2009 was for you. Ashes win, T20 World Cup win, and the 50-over World Cup win. So, those are high moments, and sometimes it's the quality, isn't it, than the quantity. So I don't think that, none of us, when we look back and read about your career, feel that you've maybe been shortchanged by fate, because God's given you so much more. Your ability to come out and this will lead us into some of the programs you're doing for Surrey, in terms of maybe finding the next 20, 30 Ebony Rainford-Brents coming out of the inner city program, the chance to shine, this new initiative that Surrey have put out where you've tweeted about the talent you're seeing. Talk to us about that. Tell us what motivates you. It's obvious, but still, what motivates you? And yet, when you want to do programs like that, you need sponsors. You need a club, an organization, a group of people to believe in it. So how is that movement catching up? How are people really beginning to be more inclusive in the game from different communities, parts of the country, parts of the city?
Yeah, really. It's a really exciting project. Also quite a frustrating one. Like I said to you, my experience has been being in England and being in London specifically, is realizing how rich it is for a community. The area that I live in and just down the road from the Oval Cricket Ground, which everyone knows is the most densely populated place in the whole country for the African Caribbean heritage community. So hence where I grew up in, there's almost more black kids walking past our gates than any other sort of demographic. But yet still in my 25 years walking through the door, we're not seeing that transition, but we're seeing it in other sports, football, rugby, athletics. So we know that cricket has elitist roots, and I think, you know, that's not something that's an issue. But I think my experiences of being part of the community, I know that if cricket was made accessible, they would love it. The other side I would say is socioeconomically, it's not a wealthy area as such. It's, you know, it's got its deprivation and its challenges. But what I do know, and I would say this is part of my own experiences, young kids who actually have grown up having to fight for a lot in life have a really good resilience, that you bring that to a sports field, and you know, if they've got talent and that resilient character, that can make them into something special. So I got speaking to people, our chief exec at Surrey, you know, we really sort of started thrashing around ideas and decided we had to do something, but we wanted to see quick success. Yes, we've got to build a foundation over 5 years, but we wanted to see quick success, and we wanted to make sure we weren't missing possible talent that's out there at the moment that could be playing in the next 5 to 10 years. So we marketed it, used Sky, BBC, the black newspapers, all the networks said, just come down to the Oval, open trial day. We didn't know what we could expect, whether it was kids who were throwing the ball backwards or what. But what was mind-blowing is we had about 100 kids register and come through and go through the trials, and we had to double the number of scholarships we were going to offer to 25 because there was so much decent talent. We just had one of the players who played a few games in our training this summer, who played a game for the Surrey under-18s and held his own, which, you know, you think about, some of these players could be playing for Surrey in 3 to 5 years if the investment is put in there. And so what it taught us is so many things. One, there's talent on our doorstep that we are not giving a looking or giving access. I think that's around the world. We don't have good community opportunities right in the hearts of all these communities that they can learn and grow. But also there was real big interest from, you know, for example, the African Caribbean communities. So I think there are lots of projects going on in England specifically, that if we get our heads together, we've started to get some investment, and hopefully we're going to have an announcement in the next month or so. You know, the dream now at the moment is to take this national and just go on a hunt for diverse talent. And, you know, I want to see from the black community, but the Asian community is underrepresented compared to what we actually have in the UK. The amount of, for numbers, British Asians, you know, the white working class in the Northeast, I'd like to see more lower socioeconomic groups make it through. So the model that we're trying to develop is how we go out and find that talent and then support that talent through to the structure. So a lot of fun work, but I'm really, really passionate because of the experiences of what I've seen growing up, and knowing those barriers can be broken down if we really invest.
Talking about barriers, let's move to the sort of next phase, if you will. 2010, last ODI against India, and we're going to talk about India in a moment as well. But as you sort of decided that you had maybe you weren't delivering to your own standards in playing for England, or whatever other reasons there may have been, you decided to sort of call it quits from a playing for England perspective internationally. And at that point in time, did you really know, or did you already have something which told you that, okay, I'm going to make a career in broadcasting, or I'm going to do commentary, or I'm going to write a column, I'm going to do whatever? Or was it, again, one of those things where you sort of said, this is what I am going to do now, and we'll just see what happens? Which way was it?
So me and you have had conversations many times about fate and trusting maybe some of the elements. I don't know what you want to call them in the bigger universe. I think my next phase, when I left playing, I had zero clue what I was going to do. it was like an intuitive, I've got to hang up my boots now. I just knew it. I remember calling Isha Gua actually, because our careers kind of bumbled along at the same time, and then she was like, no, stay. And then she called me a week later and she was like, I'm gone too. So I was like, right, if you're gone, I'm gone. So we both kind of, we hopped out together, but with no clear plan. And that's quite scary actually for, you know, especially as I turned into this obsessive planner to get through my career. I had no plan. And I got this random call about 2 weeks later while I didn't know what I was going to do. from Adam Mountford, someone we know. I didn't know him, but he called me and said, I've heard that you wanted to move into broadcasting. Now, I don't know where he heard it from. I don't know if I'd ever met him. I was just like, yeah, that's exactly what I want to do. Now, I had no clue. It's a bit of fate. I think, obviously, you know, maybe some natural talent for speaking, but those sort of things, there was a few things that lined up. And I look back at now, and I think the timing that me and Isha, so there's a few things. One, we were both obviously love to talk. But I do think there was something about the timing and the moment in history for women, opportunities for women of color as well. Those sort of things that people were ready to hear our voices. I know that sounds weird, and I didn't know that broadcasting would be a medium for me, but it kind of it offered itself to us, and I suppose we just ended up running with it. You know, we started on a couple of women's games, and then within a few months I was doing the England men's ODIs, and then all of a sudden you're at a World Cup, and then I'm meeting you and I'm traveling around the world, and it just flew. And I think when things flow like that, where you don't have to force it, something kind of just happens. You have an intuitive, and there's been many things where I have an intuitive, I've got to finish this now, or I've got to start something today. And then all of a sudden these series of things happen, you know, it's kind of meant to be. So I would say broadcasting found me rather than me finding it. And you just have to have a bit of faith in trusting what your intuition tells you in that moment.
And yet it was in that sense, it almost as if you were made for it, because the way you've sort of taken to it, the way you've enthralled listeners and viewers in terms of your work on television as well as on radio. As someone who's experienced it firsthand, I can tell you it was absolutely brilliant. Not that you need a certificate of anything of any kind from me, but as you got into this, was there any problem at all, or any sense at all that you were once again pushing the boundaries in many ways, going boldly where no woman has gone before, kind of thing, to paraphrase Starship Enterprise? Was that feeling there? Were you in any way overwhelmed? Were you in any way felt that you had to perform at a much higher level to be accepted? Was there any such feeling, or were you just embraced in a warm, cuddly environment and given the rope and help to sort of find your own feet?
I think there's a few things there. I think the commentating environment, I'll say, is much more open and warm actually than sort of some of the playing career experiences. So in that sense, Adam Mountford, Jonathan Agnew, people like that were quite really supportive. And I think one thing I think he did really well actually was there was never any label put on you're here because you're a woman. It was always, we think you're very good broadcasters and we want you to be part of this. And that was important because I was also conscious that, you know, papers were writing up that myself and Isha were the first sort of analysis roles. So there'd been Ali Mitchell, Donna Simmons, etc., who'd done lead commentary, but as players and as pundits, it was the first two in the 60-year program, and that came with it, you know, a little bit, not a huge amount, but enough on social media that made you aware that, you know, people are aware of it and people are judging you. I definitely had, in the early years, you'd wake up and have a few nightmares that I was going to get ripped off air. Like, so you'd wake up a bit like, I don't know if you've ever had those cricketing dreams where you like can't find your pads type thing. I don't know if you've had those. I used to have a few of them where you can't find your pads, or you like get to the wicket and you can't get your bat up or something like that. I had those commentary nightmares for a few years, and it's more, how to describe it, it took me a while, I would say, to feel comfortable that I deserved to be there, because you look around and you still think, oh my god, is this quite us? You know, you'd seen the history of the commentators that had come before and who were working around the world, and there weren't really women on broadcast like there are now. You know, when you see Mel Jones, Mel Farrell, Lisa Stalaker, the names now are commonplace, but at that stage I did feel a pressure, and you felt that you had to do your research, which is a good thing, but if you didn't and you made a mistake, you were worried that Twitter was going to attack you. So you know, I feel much more confident now, and I can take or leave social media. I don't worry too much, even though you still get your occasional trolls, but those early couple of years, I think it took a little while to really feel like I deserve to be there and just go all in and not worry too much.
And as you sort of started experiencing a different environments in which to commentate, in which to broadcast, and obviously with it comes the experience of that country or that region. We met first on your first trip to, not first trip, but first trip as a broadcaster to India in the Women's World Cup. And talk to us about how it was going back to the Caribbean when you did commentary there, because in a way you were returning to your roots. How it was to come out and sort of look at India from a different lens of sitting in an air-conditioned box and not out in the heat and competing in a sense. How different was it? What has it done to you as a person? And what would you say to people who would like to think of broadcasting or being involved with the sport and going around the world? What does it do to you as a person? I know it's added to your bucket list, and we're going to come to that in a minute.
Yeah, I think, travel has mostly been, something that I'm most fortunate for as a player and broadcaster. I think you have such different experiences as a player because you're going there under a certain kind of pressure of performing and stuff like that. Whereas when you broadcast, your job is there to sell the game to the masses. And I think women's cricket, you knew that you had to make sure that you were 1,000% on, because anyone who catches a glimpse, you wanted them to feel like this was something special. The men's game, slightly different. You need to keep educating and informing the audience on what they want to hear. So I think I had to learn that. But I think the travel as well is, different styles, like learning and working with you and your style of commentaries would be very different to a West Indian commentator, an Australian commentator. And I think that difference, like for example, Australia, if I was doing radio commentary, they're cricket and much more sort of focused. TMS might be a little bit story based, then go into the cricket and story, and you had these different styles. And also the pleasure of being able to sit down and learn your craft from a variety of different sources was something that I really valued. And, going to India, and that was the first kind of major trip I went on. I would just say the richness of the community, the love for it. I think that's one thing about when I've traveled to your country is that love deepens your love for it, and then deepens your love for broadcasting, because you're realizing like the impact all of this has on different communities around the world. Going back to West Indies has been good fun because, like you say, those roots, and people kind of really proud. I think that's the word I would say, of seeing a black woman who's doing well, from an English perspective. Like I'd always get that sort of love and support, which has been really nice. A bit of freedom, so your commentary can be a little bit more fun and free because there is that joy. So I would say to anyone getting into broadcasting, it's the joy of not just learning your craft in your little world of what you know and where you are. It's being able to see how the world loves what you do, and that's something that if anyone, and you've had the chance, but anyone who has a chance to do that, it's such an enriching experience. I feel so lucky.
It certainly is, and we have to consider ourselves blessed in that sense. Let's move to the slightly bigger picture of the women's game now, Ebony. It reached this wonderful sort of peak with the Women's World Cup in Australia last year, and then what's happened in 2020 sort of came around. It's impacting all sport in different ways, and I just want your perspective on: do you think that it is probably hurting women's cricket more than men's cricket for a variety of reasons? B, what can women's cricket organizers, administrators, or even people like WCZ and Yash and his team, where we are trying to just figure out and feel our way around how we can play a small role in just sort of keeping the momentum going, develop the sport, bring more into it, bring more people into it? What would be your thoughts on this subject, and what could we do?
So I think with the women, what we've seen with COVID for women's sport for me is we default back to what we know under crisis. And what we know, I suppose, is men's sport. I think the commercial engine behind men's sport is so powerful that when there's a fear of losing money, we go to where we know that money is. So what's happened positively is the performance of the women's game's gone up. They're starting to be aware that there's a huge market, but it hasn't quite been converted yet to a fully commercial opportunity. And what I would say this crisis has taught me is that we saw the progress, the 86,000. We see 1.1 billion views from the ICC on the Women's World Cup. Over here in England, for example, the Women's World Cup final that was played against India was the most watched cricket match on Sky. So we're seeing that there is an audience. But what I would say is marketing to a women's audience and a family audience is different to how you market men's cricket. And so what I think we need to focus on over these next 5 years is a priority is to get women's sport commercially viable on its own. I actually think India is mostly the best possible place for that because of the passion of it, the numbers of the community. When India get behind anything, look at the IPL, the world changes. And actually if they're able from a commercial perspective to drive the next stage of the game, I think we all have to play our part, but I think that India has the biggest potential to be a game changer for women's cricket specifically. That would be it. But how it's done is, I think it's getting down on paper. What I think we need to be more clear about the data, like what are we seeing, what are the trends, what are the interests, who is interested, what age, how do we need to market to them, how do we engage them? And I think it's different to how we currently market cricket. I think it's just slightly different. But once women's cricket moves to a commercial model, which I think is possible, but I think we need to accelerate that. Then if we had a crisis again, you'd find that women's cricket or women's sport is as important as men because they're both commercial opportunities. So look, the next stage is exciting. I think in some ways this crisis might make everyone get super focused on the recovery and then getting it to where it needs to be. So I'm positive, but I also think we need to be a little bit more, heads need to come together. I think what you guys are doing as well in terms of continuing to share the message and having a specific platform now which is dedicated and going to pick up on the rise, you're mostly to be positioned for when that complete kind of acceleration from a commercial perspective takes off. And an awareness piece, you guys should be at the forefront because you're dedicating that extra resource. So I think it's coming, but I would love to see a couple of key commercial heads come together. Not so because I think the performance is moving. I think, India, for example, were behind for a while in their performance, but you noticed they're getting to the finals now. They're starting to up their game. There's a bit more investment going. So I think the performance can keep ticking along, but now it's got to be commercial priority to make sure that the women's game now capitalizes on the audience that we're starting to see.
And along with that, isn't there also, I think, an opportunity, Ebony, in terms of the associate countries? I mean, there is so much more cricket that is apparently being played by women in countries where the men don't even feature, right? I mean, Thailand in the World Cup, Chile, Brazil, Argentina, right?
Mali's playing, Mali. Yeah, there's all these teams.
All over the place where the men's cricket side is non-existent. They're probably not even associate members for all I know. And yet there is this, now how do we start bringing those women into an environment which gives them the opportunity to play with better people, get exposed to better players so that their own games lift? I mean, it's a bit like you don't really want, and I don't mean any disrespect, I don't think we want it to be Ireland or Holland in the men's game where the 2 or 3 really bright people realize that they've got to move to be able to give rise or give an opportunity for themselves to succeed. We don't want that. We actually want these countries to develop. So any thoughts around that in terms of the associate nations and what can be done?
Yeah, I think what I've seen with some of the ICC qualifying tournaments is that you're right, these fast-moving teams like Thailand are possible. You almost equate it to like an Afghanistan in the men's team, that they can come from not having that superstructure and to almost rising. And where I think the key is just in putting in some basic good domestic structures. Even if in a country you only have 3 or 4 clubs, as long as it's high-quality coaching, and it's focused on finding good athletes, like in quite a quick amount of time, we can see that acceleration. Thailand, I remember watching their final game against West Indies. I was commentating on it at the World Cup. And I think it was Buttigieg came out and whacked this 50, which was as good as seeing someone like Tammy Beaumont whack a 50. I was completely blown away, and the excitement they had and the joy that sent back to Thailand. So I think how it needs to be done, partly with what the ICC have, a much developing sort of upcoming nations, qualifying tournaments and things like that. I think that's great. I think we also, as senior countries should do a little bit to keep making sure that we impart that knowledge, especially with Zoom and all these digital platforms now. We can be sending information and insight on how we structure our development programs and stuff like that. But the main thing is always investment, isn't it? I think, you know, what Thailand will see as a result of getting into the World Cup and doing well is almost would be a little bit more investment. And the problem that you have to break is that you have to be successful before the investment comes. And you need people to see the opportunity and the vision and start putting money in to keep that flow. So yeah, I'm really excited. I think the potential in the women's game for a team to just come out and start to fly is there. And if you actually, you know, like you say, if Thailand's women are doing well, I think that investment will come quite quickly. So we just got to keep the foot on the gas and keep sharing that global message, because one thing we don't want, and that's definitely what we don't want, is this just dominant three type situation, which is kind of there a bit now as well for the men. It's kind of the same in the men and women's game, isn't it? Australia, India, England, kind of there. Then there's like a B pot, and then it, you know, we want and I think COVID and the pandemic might actually force us as well to look at how money is spread around the global game. And so as that happens in the women's game, I think investment needs to be pushed into the right direction.
As we sort of wind down to the end, because I know you've got other commitments, there are two things I want to talk about. One is this whole amazing effort that you are leading in terms of the Black Lives Matter, and how that whole piece has now become a worldwide movement. Yes, there are people who have a particular view on it, and that's fine, because you respect other people's views. But what is it? Are you seeing impact of that in terms of the attitudes, whether in sport or elsewhere, but particularly in sport? I know some of the talent scouting and all that will help, but fundamentally, nobody can or will disagree that all lives matter. But within the all lives matter, how do we bring awareness and focus, and what can cricket do to make that even more powerful statement, given the kind of following cricket has?
Yeah, I think it's such a powerful movement. I have to be honest, in my whole lifetime, knowing that these inequalities, injustices, all these things happen, but also it's felt like the world's biggest secret sometimes, that, you know, there's been no doubt that most environments I go into, and if you look at the stats or you look at the data, the black community are often been seen or viewed at the bottom of the pile. You look at our game, for example, 0 black board members, zero black people in positions of power anywhere in the game. It's not that people haven't applied for these roles, they've not been allowed into the club. 0 black academy directors, 0 black captains, you know, it's you know that data exists, you know, seeing data around biases that exist, but no one's spoken about it. And what I think BLM has done is emotionally shaken up a lot of people. For someone like me, who I might have been a little bit on the fence and nervous to talk about race, it's forced me to come out and be a more vocal piece. I think for some people who've been asleep and didn't know these things existed, it's woken them up to be more conscious and start to process. For the ones at the far end who are never going to see it, it's maybe woken them up into some anger, but whatever it has done, it's triggered this consciousness and awareness of something, that what that's led to is accountability. So I saw a piece this morning, for example, from our chief executive at the ECB in England, Tom Harrison, where he said it's got to change. The numbers are so bad that he can't exist without this being solved, or at least some way tackled. And so that accountability piece has become really interesting. I've seen in the media, you know, that what you see in the media, for example, is there might be a few color, like faces of color on TV, but when you look behind the scenes, there's no directors, no producers, no board members. You know, that's always been the case, which everyone knows. So when this movement started, the accountability for the justice system in America is now being pulled to the surface, corporate. So I feel like it's a difficult time. I feel like it's an emotional time for the whole world, having to process whatever you feel about it, whether it's good or bad. It's either in your face and you're thinking, why do I have to deal with this? Or you're on my end going, right, I have to get quite active. And one thing I say about Michael Holding, and having the pleasure of working with him this summer, is to see the strength of character he had has made me feel a bit stronger in myself, of being able to stand up for what you believe in. That piece that we did, I don't think I would have done it if it was me on my own. I knew Mikey was there, and Mikey was going to hit hard, and Mikey was going to educate. And it also allowed me to, my emotions were to feel it, you know, even just as I'm speaking now, it was very emotional and teary, but it was also to have the confidence to be vulnerable, because that's how I felt and that's how my experiences have made me feel. So where we are now is, I think we've got an awareness, I think we've got advocates, I think there's an accountability piece that is going to take years to kind of get through the emotional stress of it, but the awareness is the most important piece, because this has been bumbling along. It's not just for the Black community. I would say there's many underrepresented groups that I hope this movement starts to stimulate people looking at who is getting a fair crack in society and who isn't, and why, and start to really invest and support those parts of the community to come up.
That's fantastic, and more power to that movement and to people like you and Mikey, because I think if you replace the word Black and sort of just replace it with all those people in whichever part of the world who have had more injustice than fair treatment, I think that's really what it represents. And it's a great opportunity for cricket as a sport to bring that to the fore. We've seen sort of knee jerks in places like Zimbabwe, God forbid South Africa, where maybe sometimes it's just turning turtle, and it actually hurts the movement in some way. So let's hope good sense prevails. I know there are lots of people who feel strongly about it. I know in India we certainly do, and WCZ will certainly work towards that with people like yourselves. Thank you once again on behalf of WCZ and my personal behalf for your time. I hope that you stay well, look after yourself, and as we move forward, this whole pandemic situation will not stand in the way of sport and women's cricket in particular staying back. So thank you again for your time. Pleasure as always.
As always, Prakash, it was a joy. Thank you for your time.